Black billionaire in disguise got humiliated at his own hotel a few minutes later. He made them regret it. A wealthy black billionaire goes undercover at his own hotel, only to face unexpected humiliation. What happens next leaves everyone stunned. Before we go into details, click subscribe, like, and comment where you're watching from. I would be glad to know this story goes as far as Canada, all of the United States of America, Australia, Africa, and even the United Kingdom. So let me know where you're watching from on comments section. I pray may the good God Almighty bless and preserve you all and your family. Amen. Let's begin. The rain fell in heavy sheets across the Chicago skyline that November evening, transforming the city streets into rivers of reflected neon light. Marcus Wellington sat in the back of a yellow taxi, his worn leather jacket soaked through, watching the gleaming towers of the financial district pierce through the storm clouds like monuments to ambition and power. At 52 years old, Marcus carried himself with a quiet dignity that seemed to radiate from somewhere deep within, the kind of presence that made people look twice, though they couldn't always explain why. "That'll be $47.50, the cab driver said, pulling up to the grand entrance of the Meridian Hotel, one of the most prestigious establishments in the Midwest. The building rose 30 stories above Michigan Avenue, its Art Deco facade recently restored to its 1920s glory, every window glowing with warm, inviting light that seemed to mock the cold rain outside. Marcus handed the driver 320s and told him to keep the change. The gesture was automatic, instinctive, the kind of generosity that had become second nature over the decades, even when he was deliberately dressed down in clothes that had seen better days. His jeans were faded but clean, his jacket genuine leather but deliberately distressed, his sneakers expensive but intentionally scuffed. To the casual observer, he looked like a man of modest means, perhaps a tradesman or a laborer, certainly not someone who belonged in a hotel where rooms started at $800 per night. But appearances, as Marcus had learned throughout his extraordinary life, were the most deceptive currency in the world. He stepped out into the downpour, forgoing the umbrella service offered by the doorman, a young white man in an immaculate burgundy uniform who took one look at Marcus and subtly shifted his attention to the luxury sedan pulling up behind the taxi. Marcus noticed, of course. He always noticed. 52 years of being a black man in America had taught him to read these microaggressions the way sailors read the sea, detecting dangerous currents beneath seemingly calm surfaces. The lobby of the Meridian was a cathedral to wealth and refinement. Marble floors stretched beneath crystal chandeliers that had once illuminated the Chicago elite during the Roaring Twenties. The ceiling soared 3 stories high, decorated with hand-painted frescoes depicting scenes of classical mythology. Gods and mortals intertwined in eternal dance. Everything gleamed with the patina of old money and new polish, from the brass fixtures to the leather furniture arranged in intimate conversation areas throughout the vast space. Marcus walked across the lobby with measured steps, his sneakers squeaking slightly on the polished marble, leaving wet footprints in his wake. He could feel eyes on him, the concierge glancing up from her computer screen, a couple in evening wear pausing their conversation to watch him pass, a bellhop straightening slightly as if preparing for some kind of intervention. The weight of their judgment settled on his shoulders like an old, familiar coat that he'd known it would be this way. That was precisely why he'd come at the reception desk. A young woman named Ashley, according to her gold nameplate, was helping another guest, her smile bright and professional as she processed a corporate credit card for a white businessman in an expensive suit. Marcus waited patiently, hands in his pockets, water still dripping from his jacket onto the pristine floor. Behind Ashley, he could see the bank of computers, the cubbyholes filled with room keys and messages, the door leading to the back office where he knew the real work of running a hotel took place. When the businessman departed with his room key and complimentary upgrade, Ashley turned to Marcus with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone carrying the subtle inflection that suggested she expected his business to be brief. Perhaps directions to somewhere else, or a question about a delivery in trance. "I'd like to check in," Marcus said, his voice deep and warm, carrying just a hint of his Louisiana roots despite decades in Chicago. "I have a reservation." Ashley's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Certainly. Name on the reservation?" "Wellington. Marcus Wellington." Her fingers flew across the keyboard, her eyes scanning the screen with an expression that began as professional courtesy and slowly transformed into barely concealed skepticism. "I'm sorry, sir, but I'm not seeing a reservation under that name." "Are you sure you made it with the Meridian?" "There's a Meridian in about 15 miles south. People confuse them sometimes." The implication hung in the air between them like smoke. Marcus met her gaze steadily, his dark eyes revealing nothing of the storm brewing behind them. "I'm quite certain. Try looking under Wellington Enterprises." Something flickered across Ashley's face. Confusion, perhaps, or the first stirring of doubt. She typed again, her fingers moving more slowly this time. When she looked up, her expression had shifted from skepticism to something more complex, a mixture of surprise and defensive uncertainty. "There is a reservation here under Wellington Enterprises," she admitted, as if the computer itself might be playing a trick on her. "But this is a corporate account, a very significant corporate account. I'll need to see identification and a corporate credit card." Marcus reached into his jacket and produced his wallet, extracting his driver's license and a black American Express card, the kind that didn't have a spending limit, the kind that less than 1% of cardholders ever qualified for. He placed them on the marble counter between them with deliberate care. Ashley picked up the license, comparing the photo to the man standing before her. The resemblance was unmistakable, but her discomfort was equally clear. She was young, probably not more than 25, and Marcus could see her trying to reconcile the information in front of her with the assumptions she'd made based on his appearance. The cognitive dissonance played across her face like clouds crossing the sun. "This is unexpected," she said finally, a weak attempt at a professional smile returning to her lips. "We weren't informed that anyone from Wellington Enterprises would be checking in personally. Usually, their executive assistants handle the reservations, and the guests arrive with—" She stopped herself, but the implication was clear enough. "The guests arrived looking like they belonged." "I prefer to handle my own arrangements sometimes," Marcus said evenly. "I trust that won't be a problem?" "No, of course not, Mr. Wellington. It's just that—" She paused, glancing toward a door marked "Management" near the back of the reception area. "Would you mind waiting just one moment? I need to verify something with my supervisor." She didn't wait for his response before hurrying away, leaving Marcus standing at the counter alone. He watched her knock on the door, disappear inside, and through the door's window, he could see her engaged in an animated conversation with a middle-aged white man in a suit, the night manager, judging by his bearing and the way Ashley deferred to him. This was exactly what Marcus had anticipated. This was why he'd come. The night manager, whose nameplate would later identify him as Robert Chambers, emerged from the office with Ashley trailing behind him. He approached the counter with the practiced smile of someone who had spent years in hospitality, but Marcus could read the calculation in his eyes, the way he was assessing not just Marcus but the entire situation, trying to determine the least problematic path forward. "Good evening, sir," Chambers said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "I understand there's some confusion about your reservation?" "No confusion on my part," Marcus replied calmly. "I made a reservation, I've arrived to check in, and I've provided my identification and payment method. I'm unclear about what requires verification." Chambers' smile tightened. He picked up Marcus's driver's license and credit card, studying them with an intensity that bordered on theatrical. "These are certainly in order," he said slowly. "But you must understand, Mr. Wellington, that we take security very seriously here at the Meridian. Credit card fraud is a significant issue in the hospitality industry, and we have protocols in place." "I'm familiar with your protocols," Marcus interrupted, his voice still calm but carrying an edge now, like velvet wrapped around steel. What I'm less familiar with is the policy that requires additional verification for some guests but not others. The gentleman who checked in just before me didn't seem to face similar scrutiny. A flush crept up Chambers' neck. Every guest receives the same level of professional service? Do they? Marcus asked, and the question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that neither man needed to speak aloud. The lobby had grown quieter around them, other guests and staff members turning their attention to the confrontation unfolding at the reception desk. Chambers drew himself up slightly, his professional mask slipping to reveal something harder beneath. Mr. Wellington, if that is indeed your name, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside while we conduct the necessary verification. This is a 5-star establishment, and we simply cannot allow. Cannot allow what? The voice came from behind Marcus, feminine and sharp as a razor. He turned to see a black woman in her early 30s striding across the lobby with the kind of confidence that turned heads. She wore a tailored black suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, her natural hair styled in an elegant twist, her dark eyes flashing with barely controlled anger. "Evelyn," Marcus said, not quite managing to keep the resignation out of his voice. Evelyn Carter, Wellington Enterprises Director of Operations and Marcus's goddaughter, came to stand beside him, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. She fixed Chambers with a stare that could have frozen lava. "I'm going to ask you again, Mr. Chambers, and yes, I know your name because I've stayed in this hotel 17 times in the past 2 years. What exactly cannot be allowed in this establishment?" Chambers' face had gone from flushed to pale. "Ms. Carter, I didn't realize, we weren't informed that the owner of Wellington Enterprises might actually want to see his own property?" Evelyn's voice carried across the lobby now, and more heads turned. That Marcus Wellington, the man who purchased this hotel 6 months ago through his investment portfolio, might choose to check in without announcing himself? What exactly is the policy here for billionaires who don't arrive in limousines? The word billionaire rippled through the lobby like a stone dropped in still water. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, exhaling slowly. This wasn't how he'd wanted the evening to unfold, though perhaps he should have anticipated Evelyn's intervention. She'd always been protective, ever since she was a little girl and he'd been her father's best friend. Watching her grow from a precocious child into the formidable businesswoman standing beside him now, Chambers looked like he'd been struck by lightning. "Mr. Wellington owns the Meridian?" "Among other properties," Evelyn said coldly. 47 hotels across North America, to be precise. The Meridian was acquired last spring as part of the Lexington Group portfolio. Perhaps you should read the memos from corporate more carefully. The implications of this revelation crashed through the lobby like a wave. Staff members who had been casually observing now stared openly. Ashley had gone sheet white behind the reception desk. The couple in evening wear whispered to each other with wide eyes. The bellhop who had straightened earlier now looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Marcus stepped forward slightly, placing a gentle hand on Evelyn's arm. "That's enough," he said quietly. "Enough." She turned to him with disbelief in her eyes. "Marcus, they were treating you like a criminal. They were humiliating you in front of—" "I know what they were doing," Marcus said, his voice still calm but carrying a weight that made everyone in the immediate vicinity stop talking. "And I know why I came here tonight. This isn't the time." He turned back to Chambers, whose face had gone through several more color changes and now settled on a sickly gray. "I'll take my key now, please. The presidential suite, as reserved." Chambers fumbled with the computer keyboard, his earlier smooth professionalism abandoned entirely. "Of course, Mr. Wellington. Right away, sir. And please, let me apologize for any misunderstanding. We would never intentionally—" "Wouldn't you?" Marcus asked, and the question was so quiet, so devoid of anger or accusation, that it somehow hit harder than any shouted recrimination could have. "I wonder." He took the key card that Ashley produced with shaking hands. noticing that tears had formed in the corners of her eyes. Part of him felt sympathy for her. She was young, probably working her way through college, caught in a system that had taught her certain assumptions about the world and who belonged where. But another part of him, the part that had endured a lifetime of such assumptions, felt something harder and less forgiving. "I'll have someone bring up your luggage immediately," Chambers said, his voice tight with panic. "And please, anything you need, any service at all." "I didn't bring luggage," Marcus said. "Just myself." Apparently, that wasn't quite acceptable enough for the Meridian standards. He walked toward the elevators, Evelyn falling into step beside him, her heels clicking an angry staccato rhythm on the marble. Behind them, the lobby erupted in whispered conversations, staff members hurrying toward Chambers, guests pulling out their phones to text or post about what they just witnessed in the elevator. As the doors closed on the chaos below, Evelyn turned to Marcus with eyes still blazing. "Why didn't you tell me you were coming? Why didn't you let me arrange?" "Because that would have defeated the entire purpose," Marcus said wearily, leaning back against the elevator's mirrored wall. The reflection showed him a tired man in wet clothes, water still dripping from his jacket, looking every one of his 52 years. "I needed to see it for myself, Evelyn. I needed to know." "Know what? That people are going to judge you based on how you're dressed? That racism exists?" "Marcus, we already knew that." "No," he said quietly as the elevator climbed toward the 30th floor. "I needed to know if it was happening here, in my own hotel. Despite all our training programs, all our diversity initiatives, all the policies we've implemented. I needed to know if any of it actually matters." The elevator doors opened onto a private foyer that led to the presidential suite. Evelyn followed him to the door, waiting as he swiped his key card. The suite beyond was magnificent, 3 bedrooms, a full kitchen, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline, furniture that belonged in a museum, artwork that probably cost more than most houses. Marcus walked to the window, looking out at the city lights blurred by rain, his reflection ghostly in the glass. Behind him, Evelyn stood in the doorway, her anger slowly giving way to something more complex. Understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of it. "The answer," he said to the window, to the city, to the universe that had arranged the circumstances of his birth and the color of his skin, "is that it doesn't matter. Not enough. Not yet. We can own the hotels, we can write the policies, we can conduct all the training in the world. But when I walk through that door without the markers of wealth and power that our society has decided to value, I'm just another black man who doesn't belong." "So what do we do?" Evelyn asked, her voice small in the vastness of the suite. Marcus turned to face her, and she was struck by the expression on his face. Not anger, not even sadness exactly, but something deeper and more complicated. Determination mixed with disappointment, hope tempered by hard-won realism. "We do what I planned to do all along," he said. "We gather information, we document everything, and then we make changes. Real changes. The kind that actually matter." "You mean, I'm going to spend the next week in this hotel, Evelyn, and I'm going to see everything, experience everything. As just another guest, sometimes dressed like this, sometimes dressed appropriately for a 5-star establishment. I'm going to see how the staff treats different people, how the policies are actually implemented versus how they're written, where the gaps are between our aspirations and our reality." He walked across the room to where she stood, placing his hands on her shoulders. "And then I'm going to fix it. Not with more policies or more training sessions or more corporate memos that nobody reads, but with accountability, with consequences, and with a fundamental restructuring of how we do business." Evelyn searched his face, seeing the resolve there, the same determination that had carried him from poverty in Louisiana to the heights of American business. "You're going to fire people." "I'm going to do whatever needs to be done," Marcus said, "starting with that night manager and anyone else who participated in what happened tonight. But more than that, I'm going to make the Meridian and every other Wellington property, into the kind of place where what happened tonight becomes impossible. Not because people are afraid of consequences, but because they genuinely understand why it's wrong. He released her shoulders and walked toward the bathroom. Now go home, Evelyn. Let me dry off and think. We'll talk tomorrow, and I'll brief you on the rest of the plan. But tonight, I just want to sit with this. Sit with what it felt like to stand in my own lobby and be made to feel like I didn't belong. After Evelyn left, Marcus stood under the hot shower for a long time, letting the water wash away the rain and the cold but not the memory of the evening's humiliation. He thought about all the years that had led him to this moment, all the similar moments scattered throughout his life like stones marking a difficult path. Marcus Wellington's journey to becoming one of America's wealthiest black men had begun in a place about as far from the Meridian's luxury as geography and circumstance could arrange. He'd been born in 1973 in a small town called St. Martinville, Louisiana, in a house that his grandmother had lived in since the 1940s, a shotgun shack that leaked when it rained and baked like an oven in the summer heat. His mother, Claire Wellington, had been just 17 when Marcus was born, a brilliant girl whose dreams of college and a life beyond St. Martinville had been derailed by an unplanned pregnancy and a boyfriend who disappeared the moment the stick turned blue. She'd raised Marcus with the help of his grandmother, Mama Rose, working double shifts as a nurse's aide at the local hospital while taking classes at the community college whenever she could manage it. Money had always been tight. Not the kind of tight where you complain about skipping restaurants, but the kind where you know exactly how many days until the next paycheck and you plan every meal accordingly. Marcus had learned early to stretch a dollar, to fix things rather than replace them, to find joy in simple pleasures like fishing in the bayou with his grandfather or reading library books on the porch while fireflies painted the humid night air. But what he'd learned even earlier was that the color of his skin meant something to the world around him. Something limiting, something dangerous, something that required constant vigilance and careful navigation. He'd been 6 years old the first time a white storekeeper followed him around the shop as if expecting him to steal. 7 when a teacher told him that boys like him shouldn't aim too high, that there were perfectly good jobs in the factories if he just behaved himself. 8 when he saw his uncle pulled over by police for the 3rd time that month, spread-eagled on the hood of his own car for the crime of driving while black in the wrong neighborhood. These experiences had planted seeds in young Marcus, not of bitterness exactly, though there was some of that too, but of determination. A fierce, burning need to prove that he was more than what the world expected, more than what others assumed when they looked at his skin before they looked at his eyes. His mother had recognized this drive in him and nurtured it like a gardener tending a rare plant. She'd pushed him academically, sitting with him for hours after her shifts to help with homework even when she was dead on her feet from exhaustion. She'd found scholarships and programs for gifted students, driving him an hour each way to a better school in Lafayette when the local options proved inadequate. She'd taught him to speak properly, not in the dialect of their neighbors, which she loved but knew the world would judge, while also teaching him to code switch, to move between worlds as necessary for survival. "You're going to have to be twice as good to get half as far," she told him countless times. "That's not fair, baby, but it's real. So you'd better be prepared to be 4 times as good, just to make sure." Marcus had taken that lesson to heart. He'd graduated valedictorian of his high school class, earned a full scholarship to Tulane University, and then shocked everyone, including himself, by gaining admission to Harvard Business School for his MBA. That acceptance letter, arriving in their mailbox on a humid spring day in 1995, had made his mother cry tears of joy while Mama Rose had called every relative they had to share the news. But Harvard had been its own special kind of trial by fire. The culture shock of moving from Louisiana to Cambridge, from poverty to being surrounded by the children of privilege, from being one of many black faces to being one of a handful in most of his classes. It had nearly broken him that first semester. He'd felt like an imposter, like someone who'd snuck into a party where he clearly didn't belong, waiting for someone to discover the mistake and send him back where he came from. He'd persevered through those dark months partly through sheer stubbornness and partly through finding a small community of other students of color who understood what he was experiencing. But mostly, He'd survived by channeling that same fierce determination that had driven him since childhood, that refusal to be limited by others' expectations. T was at Harvard that he'd met James Carter, who would become his best friend and eventual business partner. James came from money, old East Coast money, the kind that whispered rather than shouted, that opened doors before you even knew they existed. He was white, privileged, and could have easily ignored the intense kid from Louisiana who studied harder than anyone else and rarely showed up to social events. But James had seen something in Marcus that went beyond race or background, a brilliant mind, a strategic genius, and an understanding of human psychology that was almost preternatural. They'd been paired on a project about emerging markets in underserved communities, and Marcus had blown James away with his insights into how businesses could succeed by actually serving rather than exploiting poor neighborhoods. "You see things nobody else sees," James had said after their presentation earned the highest marks in the class. "You understand people, understand systems, understand how to create value where others only see risk. We should partner up when we graduate." Marcus had laughed at that, assuming it was just talk, the kind of vague promise people make when they're caught up in the excitement of a good grade. But James had been serious. Dead serious. When they'd graduated in 1997, James had convinced his father, a real estate mogul with connections across the Northeast, to provide seed funding for their first venture. Wellington Carter Investments had started small, buying distressed properties in urban neighborhoods that other investors avoided. But where others saw risk, Marcus saw opportunity. He understood these neighborhoods because he'd come from one. He knew the potential, the hunger for quality services and businesses, the loyalty that communities showed to companies that actually treated them with respect. Their model was simple but revolutionary for its time. Buy distressed properties, renovate them to high standards, bring in quality tenants and businesses, but keep rents affordable and create profit through volume and long-term appreciation rather than price gouging. They hired locally, used local contractors, partnered with community organizations. They treated residents like valuable customers rather than problems to be managed. It worked spectacularly. Within 5 years, they'd expanded from Boston to New York to Philadelphia to Chicago. Within 10 years, they were major players in urban redevelopment across the country. Within 15 years, Marcus and James were both multimillionaires with a portfolio that spanned commercial and residential real estate, retail developments, and increasingly hospitality. But success brought its own challenges. As Marcus's wealth grew, so did the cognitive dissonance in how he was treated. In the boardroom, dressed in his custom suits, speaking the language of finance and development, he commanded respect, though he could still feel the subtle surprise from people who weren't expecting a black man to be the primary decision-maker. But step outside those contexts, even slightly, and the assumptions came flooding back. He remembered the time he'd shown up to tour one of his own properties wearing jeans and a casual shirt, and the building manager had tried to tell him that the apartments weren't available for Section 8. The time he'd been stopped by police while driving his Mercedes through an upscale neighborhood, accused of driving a stolen vehicle despite the registration being in his name. The time a luxury boutique security guard had followed him so obviously that other customers had noticed and complained. These incidents happened with disturbing regularity, a constant reminder that no amount of wealth could completely shield him from the country's original sin. But they also fueled his determination to create businesses that operated differently, that trained their employees to treat everyone with dignity regardless of appearance or assumptions. When James died suddenly of a heart attack in 2018, Marcus had been devastated. His best friend, his business partner, the man who'd believed in him when nobody else did. Gone at just 49 years old, leaving behind a wife and 3 children. Marcus had honored James's memory by buying out his share of the company from his widow at above market value, setting up trust funds for the kids, and renaming the company Wellington Enterprises while maintaining a charitable foundation in James's name. The loss had changed Marcus in profound ways. It had made him more aware of mortality, more focused on legacy, more determined to use his wealth and influence for meaningful change. He'd begun diversifying into more businesses, including the hospitality industry, seeing it as an opportunity to create the kind of experiences he wished he'd had throughout his life. Places where everyone truly was treated with dignity and respect, regardless of the clothes they wore or the color of their skin. That had led him to acquire the Lexington Group the previous spring, a portfolio of 47 hotels across North America, including the Meridian. He'd paid nearly $3 billion for the properties, one of the largest hospitality deals of the year. Part of the acquisition agreement was that he would maintain the existing management structure for at least 6 months while evaluating operations. Those 6 months were almost up, and tonight's experience had confirmed what he'd suspected, that despite all the policies and training and corporate initiatives, the fundamental culture in many of his properties hadn't actually changed. Good people working in bad systems, perpetuating assumptions and biases they might not even consciously recognize, creating experiences that reflected society's broader inequalities. It was going to change. Starting now. Starting here. Marcus woke early the next morning, his body still on the 5:30 a.m. schedule he'd maintained for decades. The rain had stopped during the night, and pale November sunlight filtered through the presidential suite's enormous windows, painting the furniture in shades of gold and amber. Chicago stretched out below him, the lake a sheet of hammered silver in the distance, the city stirring to life with that particular energy that major metropolitan areas carry. He made coffee in the suite's kitchen, a small pleasure he always enjoyed, even in hotels with exceptional room service, and stood at the window while it brewed, planning out his day. He'd already sent Evelyn a detailed email at midnight outlining his intentions, and he knew she'd be reviewing it first thing this morning. By now, she'd also have set certain wheels in motion, quiet background work that would support what he was about to do. At 7:30, he ordered breakfast from room service, deliberately choosing the phone rather than the tablet system that many guests preferred, wanting to interact with staff rather than avoid them. The woman who took his order was pleasant and professional, giving no indication that she knew anything about the previous night's incident. That was interesting. Either word hadn't spread through the entire staff, or they'd been explicitly instructed not to reference it. The breakfast arrived 20 minutes later, delivered by a young Latino man in his 20s wearing the hotel's burgundy uniform. His name tag read Carlos. He rolled the card in with practiced efficiency, setting up the table by the window with white linens and silver-domed plates. His movements quick but not rushed. "Good morning, Mr. Wellington," Carlos said with a genuine smile. "Beautiful day after that storm last night. Will there be anything else you need?" Marcus studied him for a moment. "Actually, Carlos, I'd like to ask you something. How long have you worked at the Meridian?" Carlos looked slightly surprised but not uncomfortable. "About 3 years, sir. Started as a dishwasher in the kitchen, worked my way up to room service. And in those 3 years, have you generally been happy here? Treated fairly?" Now Carlos looked distinctly uncomfortable, his eyes darting toward the door as if calculating whether this was some kind of trap. Yes, sir. It's a good job. They treat us well. Even when guests aren't looking," Marcus asked gently. "Even in the back of the house, in the break rooms, in the places where management doesn't typically go?" Carlos set down the coffee pot he'd been holding, his professional mask slipping slightly. "Why are you asking me this, Mr. Wellington?" "Because I own this hotel," Marcus said quietly. "And I'm trying to understand what working here is actually like, not what the corporate reports say it's like. I'm not trying to get you in trouble, Carlos. I'm trying to fix things that might be broken." A long moment passed. Carlos looked at Marcus, really looked at him, seemed to make some kind of decision. "Can I be honest, sir? Please. It's better than a lot of places. The pay is decent, the benefits are good, and most of the management treats us with respect. But," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "there are still situations, comments sometimes from guests and sometimes from senior staff, assumptions about who we are and what we're capable of. I have a degree in hospitality management from city colleges, but when I mention wanting to move into a management position, I get a lot of maybes and 'we'll see.' and then nothing happens. Give me an example, Marcus said. Something specific. Carlos hesitated, then seemed to commit. Last month, there was an opening for an assistant front desk manager position. I applied. I have the education, I have the experience, I know this hotel inside and out. They hired someone from outside instead, a white woman fresh out of college with no hotel experience. When I asked why, Mr. Chambers told me I needed to pay my dues a little longer. But I've been here 3 years. How much longer are my dues? Marcus nodded slowly, filing this information away. Thank you for being honest with me, Carlos. What you've told me won't be forgotten, and it won't negatively impact you. You have my word. After Carlos left, Marcus sat at the table but found he'd lost his appetite. He picked at his eggs, drank his coffee, and stared out at the city while his mind worked through implications and possibilities. What Carlos had described wasn't overt racism. There was no smoking gun, no explicit discrimination. It was subtler than that, the kind of systematic bias that was harder to prove but no less real in its impact. These were the kinds of problems that couldn't be fixed with a single firing or a new policy. They required fundamental cultural change, and that was going to take time, attention, and a willingness to make people deeply uncomfortable in the process. His phone buzzed with a text from Evelyn. Read your email. Are you sure about this approach? It's going to get messy. He typed back, already is messy. Time to clean house properly. At 9 o'clock, Marcus changed into one of the outfits he'd had delivered to the hotel earlier that morning. Jeans, a plain t-shirt, and a baseball cap. He looked at himself in the mirror, seeing what others would see. A middle-aged black man in casual clothes, nothing particularly distinctive or memorable. Just another face in the city's diverse crowd. Perfect. He took the elevator down to the lobby, which was bustling with morning activity. Business travelers checking out, tourists planning their days, staff members moving efficiently through their routines. No one paid him particular attention as he crossed to the concierge desk, where a white woman in her 40s was helping a couple plan a dinner reservation. When she finished with them, Marcus approached. Her name tag identified her as Patricia. Good morning, he said with a pleasant smile. I'm wondering if you could recommend a good jazz club? Somewhere authentic, not too touristy. Patricia looked at him for a moment, and he could see her making assessments. His clothes, his appearance, his demeanor. Her smile, when it came, was polite but not warm. Of course, Andy's Jazz Club is quite popular. It's in River North, about 15 minutes by taxi. Is there anything closer? I'd prefer to walk. In this neighborhood. Patricia's tone suggested this was an unusual request, perhaps even suspect. There are some places in the Loop, but they're more upscale. You might be more comfortable in. She paused delicately. Perhaps somewhere in the South Side or Bronzeville area would be more your style. I can call you a car. The implication was clear, and Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest. She was trying to redirect him to predominantly black neighborhoods, assuming based on his appearance that he wouldn't fit in or couldn't afford the upscale establishments. She was doing it politely, professionally, but she was doing it nonetheless. I think I'll try the Loop options, Marcus said evenly. Could you write down a few names for me? Patricia's smile strained slightly. Of course. She jotted down 3 names on a piece of hotel stationery, her handwriting hurried and efficient. Here you are. Have a lovely day. As Marcus walked away, he saw Patricia lean toward another concierge and whisper something, both of them glancing in his direction. He didn't need to hear the words to know the general sentiment. He'd lived this scene in 1,000 variations throughout his life. He spent the next hour wandering through the hotel's public spaces, observing interactions, noting details. In the hotel's upscale restaurant, he saw how the hostess seated different guests. The businessmen in suits got window tables with skyline views, while a black family in casual clothes got tucked in a corner near the kitchen despite multiple better tables being available. In the spa, he overheard a receptionist telling a woman with a heavy accent that all appointments were booked for the day, only to offer an opening to the very next person who inquired, a well-dressed white woman. None of it was overt. None of it was technically provable. But the pattern was unmistakable to anyone who knew how to look for it.by lunchtime. Marcus had filled several pages of notes on his phone. He returned to his suite and spent the afternoon on video calls. First with Evelyn, reviewing his findings and discussing next steps, then with his legal team to ensure everything he was planning was airtight from an employment law perspective, and finally with his head of human resources to begin planning the comprehensive changes that would be necessary. "You're really going scorched earth on this," Evelyn said during their call, her face serious on his laptop screen. "You understand how this is going to look? How people are going to react?" "I understand perfectly," Marcus said, his voice firm. "And I don't care how it looks. This is exactly the kind of systemic problem that persists because people are more worried about perception than about doing what's right." That evening, Marcus dressed differently, this time in one of his tailored suits, a Brioni that cost more than some people's monthly rent, with Italian leather shoes and a watch that could have bought a decent used car. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw the transformation that wealth's markers provided. Suddenly he was respectable, worthy of attention, someone who belonged in spaces like the Meridian. When he walked through the lobby this time, the difference was striking. The same staff members who had ignored or redirected him that morning now smiled warmly. Patricia at the concierge desk practically leaped up to greet him. "Good evening, Mr. Wellington. How can I help you this evening?" The contrast was so stark it would have been comical if it weren't so tragic. "I'd like to speak with Mr. Chambers," Marcus said quietly. "And I'd like to speak with him in the lobby publicly right now." Patricia's smile faltered. I'm not sure he's available." "Make him available. Tell him Marcus Wellington would like 5 minutes of his time. Here. Now." 10 minutes later, Robert Chambers emerged from his office, his face already showing signs of stress. Word had clearly reached him about Marcus's activities throughout the day, about the questions he'd been asking, the interactions he'd been observing. He approached with the wary expression of a man walking toward his own execution. "Mr. Wellington," Chambers said, extending his hand. Marcus didn't take it. "How can I help you this evening?" "You can start by gathering your senior staff," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the lobby despite its measured tone. "Front desk managers, concierge supervisors, restaurant managers. I want them all here in 15 minutes. Sir, perhaps we could discuss this in my office." "No. Here. In the lobby where everyone can see and hear. Transparency, Mr. Chambers. It's about to become our most important value." 15 minutes later, a group of nervous-looking managers stood in a semicircle in the lobby. Guests had stopped to watch, sensing something significant was happening. Staff members hovered at the edges of the scene, phones discreetly out, no doubt recording or texting colleagues about what was unfolding. Marcus stood before them, and when he spoke, his voice was calm but carried the weight of absolute authority. "My name is Marcus Wellington. I own this hotel. I own 47 hotels across this continent. And I am disgusted by what I've witnessed here over the past 24 hours. The assembled managers shifted uncomfortably. In the background, someone gasped. "Last night, I was humiliated at the reception desk because I didn't look wealthy enough to belong here. This morning, your concierge tried to redirect me to more appropriate neighborhoods based on my appearance. This afternoon, I watched your restaurant staff seat black and brown guests in less desirable locations despite better tables being available. I witnessed your spa staff lie about availability to certain guests while welcoming others." Marcus paused, letting his words sink in. The lobby had gone completely silent except for his voice. "Some of you might want to claim these are isolated incidents, that I'm reading too much into innocent misunderstandings. Let me be clear. I am a black man who has spent 52 years navigating a world that makes assumptions about me based on the color of my skin. I know the difference between an innocent mistake and systematic bias. What I witnessed here is the latter. He looked directly at Chambers. Mr. Chambers, you're terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings, and HR will contact you about your final paycheck and benefits. Do not attempt to access any hotel systems or contact any staff members after you leave this building. Chambers went white. Mr. Wellington, please, I have a family. So do the countless guests you and your staff have made feel unwelcome in this establishment. So does Carlos, the room service attendant with a hospitality degree who you told needs to pay his dues while you hired less qualified candidates from outside. Your choices have consequences, Mr. Chambers. Today, you're experiencing them. Marcus turned to the rest of the assembled staff. The rest of you have a choice. You can stay and be part of rebuilding this hotel into something better. Something that actually lives up to its 5-star rating, not just in amenities but in how every single guest is treated. Or you can leave. But if you stay, understand that things are changing, starting now. He pulled out his phone and displayed a document on its screen. This is the new Meridian Charter. It will be posted in every break room, every office, every public space in this hotel. It states simply, every guest who walks through our doors deserves the same level of respect, attention, and service, regardless of their appearance, race, ethnicity, accent, or perceived economic status. Any staff member found violating this charter will be terminated without exception. Any manager who overlooks such violations will be terminated alongside them. But sir, one of the front desk managers ventured nervously, how do we prove violations? How do we know? Starting Monday, we're implementing a mystery shopper program, but with a difference. We'll have shoppers of all races, ethnicities, and income presentations testing our service regularly. We're installing AI-powered cameras that can analyze guest service patterns, where people are seated, how quickly they're served, the warmth of interactions. We're creating an anonymous reporting system for both guests and staff to report discriminatory behavior. And most importantly, we're tying manager bonuses directly to equity metrics. If there are statistical disparities in how different demographic groups are treated, management doesn't get paid. Marcus could see the shock on their faces, the dawning realization that this wasn't performative, wasn't just words and policies that would be forgotten in a few months. This was structural change, backed by money and technology and consequences. Additionally, Marcus continued, we're implementing mandatory bias training. Not the useless kind you've probably sat through before, but intensive, uncomfortable sessions that actually work. We're partnering with organizations that specialize in this. It's not optional. And we're creating fast-track programs for employees of color to move into management positions based on merit and potential, not just paying dues. He looked at Carlos, who had appeared in the crowd and was watching with wide eyes. Carlos, you're promoted to assistant front desk manager, effective tomorrow. You'll report directly to the new front desk manager we'll be hiring from outside. Your salary is doubled. Don't make me regret this. Carlos looked like he might cry. Thank you, sir. I won't. Marcus addressed the full group again. This hotel is going to become a model, not just for our other properties, but for the entire industry. We're going to prove that you can run a profitable, successful, 5-star establishment while treating every human being who walks through the door with dignity. And when we succeed here, we're rolling this out to every Wellington property in North America. He paused, letting the weight of this vision settle over them. I didn't become a billionaire by accepting the world as it is. I became a billionaire by seeing what the world could be and building it myself. This is me building. You can either help or you can get out of the way. Choose now. The silence that followed was profound. Then, slowly, Patricia the concierge stepped forward. Mr. Wellington, I need to apologize. This morning, when you asked about jazz clubs, I made assumptions I shouldn't have made. I directed you based on stereotypes, not on what you actually wanted. I'm sorry. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Thank you for acknowledging that, Patricia. Now tell me, why did you make those assumptions? She swallowed hard, aware that everyone was watching. Because I've worked in hospitality for 20 years and I've learned to read people, to make quick judgments about what they want based on how they present themselves. It's supposed to be good service, anticipating needs. But I realize now that I was letting prejudice guide those judgments. That's exactly the problem, Marcus said, not unkindly. Good intentions tangled up with societal biases, creating harm while believing you're providing service. That's what we're going to untangle. That's the work. Patricia, you can keep your job, but you're going to be among the first to go through the new training. And I want you to lead a task force on reimagining how concierge services can be delivered without bias. Can you do that? She nodded, tears in her eyes. Yes, sir. I can do that. Over the next hour, Marcus met individually with key staff members, outlining expectations, listening to concerns, answering questions. Some people left, notably Ashley from the front desk, who submitted her resignation via email rather than face him directly. Others stayed, clearly shaken but willing to adapt. By the time Marcus returned to his suite that night, he was exhausted but satisfied. Evelyn called as he was making tea in the kitchen. It's all over social media, she said, pulling up her phone to show him. Guests posted videos. #BlackBillionaire is trending. The hospitality industry is having a complete meltdown. I've got reporters calling for comments. We're either heroes or villains depending on who's talking. Marcus sipped his tea, looking out at the Chicago night. What matters is whether it works. Talk is cheap, Evelyn. Results are what count. So what's next? Next, we do the real work. We bring in the consultants, implement the systems, track the data, adjust as needed. We make this stick not just for a news cycle but for the long term. And then we replicate it across every property we own. You know this is going to cost millions. The training, the technology, the restructuring. Good, Marcus said firmly. We spend millions on marble lobbies and Egyptian cotton sheets. We can spend millions on making sure every human being who encounters those lobbies and sheets is treated with dignity. That's not a cost. That's an investment in what kind of company we want to be. He paused, then added softly, My mother died 5 years ago, Evelyn, but before she passed, she told me something I've never forgotten. She said, Marcus, you've become wealthy beyond our wildest dreams. But the true measure of your life won't be the money you made. It'll be whether you used that money to make the world a little less cruel than you found it. His voice caught slightly. Every time I walk into a space and face those assumptions, those judgments, that casual disrespect, I think about every other black person, every brown person, every person who doesn't fit society's narrow definition of who belongs in places like this. I think about how tired they must be. How exhausting it is to constantly prove your worth, your right to exist in spaces you've paid to access. And you want to change that. I want to try. Maybe I'll fail. Probably I can't fix everything. But I can fix my 47 hotels. I can create 47 spaces where, genuinely, everyone is welcome. Where the staff has been trained and incentivized to treat everyone equally. Where the systems and structures support equity rather than undermining it. If I can do that, if we can do that, maybe it spreads. Maybe it becomes a competitive advantage that forces other hotels to follow suit. Maybe we start a ripple that becomes a wave. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Your mother would be proud. I hope so, Marcus said. God, I hope so. 6 months out the Meridian's lobby looked much the same as it had that rainy November night. The same marble floors, the same crystal chandeliers, the same Art Deco elegance. But everything had changed. Marcus stood at the reception desk, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, checking in for another surprise visit. The young black woman behind the desk, a recent hire named Jasmine, greeted him with a genuine smile. Welcome to the Meridian, sir. How can I help you today? I have a reservation. Wellington. Excellent. Let me pull that up for you. Her fingers flew over the keyboard with no hesitation, no skepticism, no calling for a manager. Within 2 minutes, he had his room key and a warm welcome. You're in the presidential suite. Carlos will be happy to help with any needs during your stay. He speaks very highly of you. Marcus smiled. Carlos is doing well? He's amazing. Best assistant manager we've had. He's actually being considered for the general manager position that's opening up at our Boston property. As Marcus walked toward the elevators, he observed the lobby's activity. A family in casual clothes, South Asian, parents and 3 children, were being warmly welcomed by a concierge who was taking genuine time to understand their needs. An elderly black couple was being seated at a premium window table in the restaurant without hesitation. A housekeeper was being greeted by name by a guest she'd apparently built a rapport with. Small moments. Ordinary interactions. But that was exactly the point. This should be ordinary. This should be normal. The changes hadn't been perfect or easy. They'd lost about 30% of their staff in the first 2 months. People who couldn't or wouldn't adapt to the new culture. They'd invested almost $8 million in training, technology, and restructuring. They'd faced lawsuits from terminated employees, negative press from critics who claimed they were going too far, and skepticism from parts of the hospitality industry. But the results spoke for themselves. Guest satisfaction scores were up 23%. Staff retention among remaining employees was at an all-time high. Most importantly, the equity metrics they developed showed measurably equal treatment across demographic groups for the first time in the hotel's history. The Meridian had become the highest-rated hotel in Chicago, not despite the changes but because of them. Other Wellington properties were now implementing the same model. 2 major hotel chains had reached out to learn about their approach. A Harvard Business School case study was being developed about the transformation. Most satisfying to Marcus, he'd received hundreds of letters from guests, particularly guests of color, thanking him for creating spaces where they felt genuinely welcome for the first time in their lives. That evening, Marcus had dinner in the hotel restaurant with Evelyn and her 2 daughters. It was the 7-year-old's birthday, and she wanted to eat somewhere fancy. As they laughed and celebrated over pasta and birthday cake, Marcus looked around the restaurant and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time when occupying spaces like this. Relaxed, at ease, like he truly belonged, not because of his wealth or his ownership, but simply because he was a human being deserving of respect and good service. Uncle Marcus, the 7-year-old said, chocolate on her face. Why are you crying? He laughed and wiped his eyes. Happy tears, sweetheart. Sometimes people cry when they're happy. Why are you happy? He looked at her, this beautiful black child who would grow up in a world that still had countless challenges, but maybe, just maybe, a few more spaces where she'd be truly welcome, where the color of her skin wouldn't determine whether she belonged. Because something that was broken is being fixed, he said. And it turns out that fixing broken things is the best feeling in the world. As they left the restaurant that night, Marcus paused in the lobby, taking in the scene one more time. The Meridian hummed with the energy of a place that worked, that fulfilled its promise to every person who walked through its doors. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever would be, but it was better. Measurably, demonstrably better. His phone buzzed with a message from his head of operations. Boston property ready to begin transformation protocol. Seattle and Miami requesting to start early. Movement is building. Marcus smiled and typed back, approved. Let's show the world what hospitality actually means. He thought about that night 6 months ago when he'd stood in this same lobby, dripping wet and disrespected, being judged by his appearance rather than his humanity. The humiliation had been real, the hurt had been deep, but from that pain had come purpose, and from that purpose had come change. They couldn't fix the world overnight. They couldn't eliminate all bias, all prejudice, All the subtle and not-so-subtle ways that people were made to feel less than based on immutable characteristics. But they could fix 47 hotels. They could create ripples. They could prove that doing the right thing and being successful weren't mutually exclusive. And sometimes that was enough. Sometimes that was everything. As Marcus walked out into the Chicago night, a young black couple was walking in. She in a beautiful dress, he in jeans and a nice shirt, clearly heading to the bar for a date. Marcus held the door for them and watched as the doorman greeted them with the same warmth he showed every guest. As they walked into the lobby with the confidence of people who knew they belonged, the young man glanced back at Marcus and smiled. "Thanks, man." "Anytime," Marcus said, and meant it. He stood there for a moment longer, watching through the glass doors as the couple was warmly welcomed, as the lobby continued its evening rhythm, as everything that had been broken continued its slow, steady healing. Then Marcus Wellington, billionaire, businessman, and believer in what the world could become, walked into the Chicago night with his heart full of hope and his mind already planning the next steps in a journey that was far from over but had finally, truly begun. The end.